Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today. On today's episode, I speak with Mallory Kiersten, who, funnily enough, we discovered lives very, very close to me. What a coincidence. Mallory talks with us today about her mental health journey, the things that have helped, and how she worked on her mindset. I do want to give a bit of a trigger warning here. Mallory does talk about a suicide attempt. She does not go into details at all. All she does is bring up that she did make an attempt. But I did just want to let you know before we get started. It's going to be a great conversation. I am looking forward to speaking with Mallory about her mental health journey. So please help me welcome Mallory on the show. Mallory, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. So, to get us started, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience today and sharing your story, your journey with your mental health?
I'm Mallory Kiersten, and I'm a self-love and unstuck yourself coach. And if you had asked me, so about 15, 16 years ago, when I really started a pretty big journey with my mental health, if you had asked me back then what I would be doing now, that would not be anywhere in my answer list. I think it was 2007 that I really started diving into mental health and therapy. It was after I had attempted suicide. I just was like, I can't live like this anymore. And I chose a pretty drastic attempt at a way out. And then I was like, okay, well, that didn't work. And, I'm grateful that it didn't, but that's really what kind of launched me into my mental health journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Would you mind sharing what kind of symptoms you were experiencing before your suicide attempt? What was going on for you mentally, physically?
I think the biggest thing was that I had reached a point of exhaustion, a point of burnout. And I just didn't have the language back then to really state what was actually going on. I didn't have even a fraction of the understanding that I do about what trauma is, how it shows up in the body, and, how it can affect us in our daily life. I was just exhausted. I was not interested in anything, and I didn't want to do anything anymore. I wanted to be in bed all of the time. And those sound an awful lot like symptoms of depression. I don't want this to come off like I'm blaming or I'm upset with the various therapists that I had beginning in about 2007, because they were just doing what they knew how to do with only actually having a teeny tiny bit of the story. Because I'm growing up, I'm thinking that my life is totally fine. I never went to bed hungry. I always had clothes on my back. I was involved in extracurricular activities. My grades were good. I had friends, and I had a lot of hobbies and interests. I burned out. I wanted to take a year off between high school and college, and my mom basically said no, because she was afraid that I wouldn't return to college after that year was up. Really, what I needed was rest. I needed deep rest. I needed deep connection with myself. Yeah, a deep connection with myself. And I needed to understand what I truly wanted instead of essentially, playing the role of the good girl, the all around girl next door, well rounded good girl, and truly discover what I wanted.
I'm so glad you're sharing this because I feel like so many people right now are feeling how you felt, feeling just absolutely exhausted and burned out. So many people I talk to tell me that they're burned out and they just have this exhaustion and just going through the motions of the day, getting up, getting ready for work and sitting in traffic, just going through the motions, coming home, laying on the couch. And I just feel like this is a very common story for a lot of people right now.
And for me, I eventually reached a point, I went through college, I got my teaching credential, I met my partner, and I had checked all the boxes there too. So even though I was doing all of this internal work, particularly in therapy and reading personal development books. I mean, I think I have a little bit of an uncommon experience in the sense that as early as 5 years old, my dad was shoving Louise Hay books in my hands. She had a series of, they were like coloring and storybooks combinations. So you could like color the story and you could listen to the book on tape. Yes, that's how old it is, book on tape. Um, but you could like listen to the story and color the pages while you're listening to the story. And I just remember doing that as a child, sort of starting to nerd out on personal development at a pretty early age. That said, I was doing all of this personal development work. I was going to therapy. I was working on my mental health. I was working on all of the things that I thought were going to help me be fulfilled. I had the partner, I got the job, I had the home, and waking up one day. And I think that this is probably pretty common too. We check all the boxes. We get the house, we get the spouse, we get the children, we have the flourishing career, we probably have a nice car. We have all the things. We've checked all of the boxes of all of the things that everybody told us were going to make us happy or were going to make us successful. And then it's like, well, I checked all the boxes. Why am I not happy? Why am I not fulfilled? It seems like every woman in particular that I have this conversation with has some version of this story that has shown up for them. And that was certainly the case with me.
I agree. I hear a version of this story so often. So can you take us from the point where you had your suicide attempt, you realize that you can't live like this anymore? What comes next for you?
I mean, I wish I could say that it was all uphill from there. I mean, it was all uphill in the sense that I never attempted again. But essentially, what I did was I got a change of scenery. I moved out of the town that I had grown up in. I moved in with my father. My parents are divorced, so I moved in with my father and my stepmother, about an hour and a half away from where my mom lived. I just had a quote unquote fresh start. And in that fresh start, yes, it was new surroundings. I made new friends. Part of the stuff behind the suicide attempt was coming out queer in a place where queerness is not as readily accepted as the Bay Area of California. Let's just put it that way. So I ended up moving to the Bay Area of California where that was a lot more accepted. And I engaged in a lot of the same patterns of busyness, overscheduling, all of those same things that had burned me out and gotten me to that point of exhaustion before, but just never quite reaching that point where I wanted to commit suicide again, but definitely reaching those points of exhaustion. I graduated, I moved in with my partner. I was still a barista for Starbucks and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was actually a shoulder injury that I got while working at Starbucks that prompted me to go ahead and go back to school, get my teaching credential. I eventually got a permanent teaching job, and I was like, okay, this is the thing. This is the career. This is the life circumstance outside of me that is going to provide me with all of the happiness in the world that I truly desired. And it wasn't. So I quit teaching back in 2017. That was a little bit of an interesting story. I don't want to get long-winded here, but I feel like this is important. I ended up quitting teaching because at the end of the year, we gave each and every one of our students that year a questionnaire to fill out about what did you like about the classes? What didn't you like? What did you feel like you wanted more of? And I had one student, one of my history students, talk about a lecture I had given back in October of that year. Keep in mind, this is June, and these are 8th graders, and their attention spans and memories aren't usually this great. But she remembered my passion for a topic that I talked about back in October. And she said, I wish that that passion had been present throughout the year. I started crying because I realized like this wasn't the path for me, and I did not want to be 30 years down the road making children hate learning because I was so miserable. And so that's actually what did it for me. And when I realized that coaching was a thing, and I realized that there are so many people out there with similar stories to what I just described, this is what I get to do now. And it was a little bit messier than that, but eventually, yeah, it all just sort of happened and landed in my lap in the form of mentors stepping out of the woodwork and connection with other humans who just live life totally off the beaten path. And me finally having this realization of, oh, I get to do it my way? This is amazing. I get to do it my way. And yeah, just it all sort of falling into place that now I get to help guide people to that as well.
I love that, and I love that story that one of your students helped you to realize your passion and that you weren't maybe passionate about what you were doing, and I was kind of laughing to myself when you were telling your story because I work in a middle school and high school right now. I was thinking, I don't know if going into teaching is a great option for somebody that struggles with burnout.
It is definitely, well, okay, the vacation time is great.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Let's say that part. I enjoyed that part. But yeah, for somebody who struggles with burnout, I mean, it was nice having these little breaks in between where it's like, okay, just need to get to Thanksgiving break. Okay, just need to get to winter break. Just need to get to spring break. You know, you have like these bursts and then you get the break. The challenge though there is that most of the time for the first week of whatever break it is, you're sick. That's kind of the challenging part there.
And not only sick, but right before and right after the breaks, the children are wild. I don't know what happens, but in my experience, around the breaks are very torturous times.
I'm having memories. I am having memories right now.
So, would you mind sharing with us? I would love to get into if you were using any sort of during this time of your exhaustion and burnout and having a hard time and having these thoughts of, suicide and everything. I'm wondering if you had any really unhealthy coping skills or coping skills that really worked effectively for you.
I would say my unhealthy coping skill was emotional eating and binge eating. And, I would have these sort of disordered binge and restrict cycles, but not really, I wasn't anorexic. I wasn't bulimic. I didn't have a specific eating disorder, but I had disordered eating. The healthy coping mechanism that was a part of my super challenging schedule that I had set up for myself was music. I did a lot of music and a lot of theater, and I had this, safe haven, this place where I got to express all the things that were trying to come out and that were trying to come to the surface that I just couldn't quite put a finger on it. I couldn't quite put a finger on what was wrong, but I got to have this place where things got to come out that I wouldn't normally express in my everyday life.
I love that. I think music is so helpful for people. And I know of, some people I work with make playlists for themselves and things like that. Do you have any particular songs that you would love to listen to in times that you were having a hard time?
Basically anything that I could sing loudly and obnoxiously to. The entire Into the Woods soundtrack for me, the 1987 original Broadway cast version, not the Disney version that came out in like 2010 or whatever, with Bernadette Peters being this loud, belty, amazing ball of amazingness. That's a big one for me. Nowadays I engage in a movement practice through S Factor. It's a feminine movement practice that is essentially letting your body guide the movement, getting really slow and intentional with your movement. And a lot of the music that is shared in those classes are so, so helpful because it really brings the brain, body, emotion connection together. And it is very common for me that I cry almost every class. It is very common for that motion to like move emotion through my body and out through my eyeballs. So it's a really healthful expression of, what's going on for me when I am having a hard time, or when I'm starting, oh shoot, I'm noticing that I'm starting to kind of bottle up emotions. Let me get myself in an S Factor class and move it through.
Oh, I haven't heard of that. That sounds really interesting. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, there's online classes. There's actually an in-person class in Boulder on Monday nights.
Okay. And for everyone listening, so funny. Mallory and I, right before we got on the call, discovered that we live very close to each other.
Surprise!
Yeah. What a big coincidence. That's so funny. So maybe I will run into you there in Boulder.
Surprise!
So funny. So, going back over these past several years, how have you worked on your mindset? What helps you maintain your mental health?
I think the biggest thing was my understanding that it's not ever strictly about one thing. It's not just about the brain and the mindset. It's not just about the physical body. It's not just about the emotions. It's not just about the spirituality. I tried to, quote unquote, tackle each one of those things in isolation. And I think it's just super important to remember that it all functions together, that the mind is not separate from the body is not separate from the emotion, that the emotion is not separate from the soul. It is all together, all one thing housed in this specific, I'm going to get a little woo right now, but in this specific human presence in this specific iteration of life. I think too often we try to make it about one of each of those things when it's just not. So some of the things that I mentioned, S Factor, I mentioned expression through music. Some of the other practices that I do are meditation. Something that I started doing within the last year was just really embracing my desire for spaciousness. I have my own business. I am an entrepreneur. I do a lot of copywriting. I do coaching. And I do have a variety of things on the plate. But when I understood that I really had a desire for just space after so many years of having my calendar booked out to the 5-minute increment, and that works for some people, and that's really exciting for some people. But for me, I needed a lot more breath. I needed a lot more space. And so something that I did 2 years ago is that I just literally took everything off of my schedule that wasn't an appointment. Something like this interview, that's an appointment that involves somebody else. I have to show up at a specific time in order to have this connection. If it wasn't anything like that, a client session, a meeting, those types of things. So those all stayed on the calendar. Everything else just got to go bye-bye. And how I keep myself on top of the things that need to get done is I have a priority list. It's listed out in priority order, and I get them done in priority order in this space that I've just created for myself. And oh my gosh, I have never looked back.
That is really helpful. And as you were talking, it reminded me of something that I heard that has always stuck with me, that not everything can be a priority. And that is something I've always struggled with. So I like that you mentioned you have your like priority list, you have the order, because not everything could be number one. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I've just been living my life in accordance with my priorities. This is something that I learned in the Unstuck Yourself world before I became an Unstuck Yourself coach, was this aspect of time management. If you're looking at your calendar, it is likely pretty easy to tell you what your values and priorities are based on that calendar, and probably your bank account. But specifically, your calendar and how you spend your time and how you spend your energy. Personally, I think that those are way more valuable resources than money, but that feels like a topic for another time. Um, my priorities are self, my self-care is number one. Number two is friends and family, and money-making activities, and then non-money-making activities. So non-money-making activities is stuff like cleaning the house, that kind of junk, laundry, like the stuff that but that's the lowest priority. And so what you'll see in my calendar is it's not necessarily that, oh, so self is the priority, so all of my time is blocked for me. No, that's not how that works. But I do go on my calendar first. My S Factor classes, my doctor's appointments. I just sometimes have like blocks of time that are just putter time that I can just do with whatever I want. And so sometimes that's just laying in bed for a few extra minutes in the morning. It can be a bunch of different things, but I go on my calendar first. Then I schedule my time with, I have monthly calls with certain family members and friends and that kind of thing. I schedule that social time. And my partner and I schedule time together as well. We have weekly relationship meetings, that kind of thing. Then my work gets scheduled. And then I see what's left to kind of take care of some of those more adulting things, the things that nobody wants to do. But, I feel like so often we do it backwards. We schedule job and money, then maybe we schedule some social activities, and then it's like, oh geez, I gotta clean the house, I've gotta do the laundry, I gotta do the dishes so that I can have those social events at my house. And then we give ourselves what's left. And that's the mistake that I have made from ages 11 to probably 25, 26. Let's just say 30. From 11 to 30, I made that wrong decision where I was last and everything and everybody else was first. So why not flip it? If it's not working for you, why not flip it?
I'm glad you bring this up because I think a lot of people live that way and find that really difficult. So I think it's helpful to hear that you have successfully done that. So, Mallory, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your story and all of this advice. Do you have any final parting words of wisdom or advice for our listeners today?
When I was first starting to kind of dismantle my people pleasing behaviors, I started asking, every time I was doing something, I started asking myself the question, for whom? Who am I doing this for? Is it for me? Okay, great. I'm going to keep going. Is it for somebody else? Okay. Sometimes it what would be for somebody else, and it meant that I stopped doing that thing. Or it meant, oh, yes, I am doing this for somebody else, and I'm going to continue to do it because it truly brings me joy to do it for this person. Because there's a difference, there's nuance there, right? I would just really encourage, if you're feeling the burnout, if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know how much longer I can do this, start asking yourself that question. For whom? Who am I doing this for? Start taking off the things from your schedule that aren't lighting you up. Outsource it, delegate it, something, because it doesn't have to be on you. The weight does not have to be on your shoulders.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Mallory, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Can you tell all of our listeners where they can find you?
Absolutely. So I am findable on Instagram at Instagram.com, The Joy Goddess, TikTok. My username there is The Joy Goddess as well. And you can find me and friend me on Facebook at mallory.kiersten.888. And if you're looking for a community of people who are doing this kind of work right alongside you, I am at one of the Unstuck Yourself coaches in the Unstuck Yourself Facebook group. You can facebook.com groups/unstuck yourself. This is the space that my mentor created, and she took a bunch of us on as coaches in that space as well. There's a bunch of amazing content, totally free. It's a great place to ask questions and start living this life for yourself again.
Awesome. And everyone, I am going to have all of Mallory's links in the show notes. Definitely go check her out. Mallory, thank you so much. It was so great talking with you today.
Thank you so much. It was so great being here. Thank you for having me.
Mallory, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. I really appreciate it, and I know that my listeners do as well. Like I said, all of Mallory's links are in the show notes, so definitely go check her out. If you liked this episode, please share it and tag me on social media at The Wellness Project with Des, either on Instagram or Facebook. And I would greatly appreciate it if you left my podcast a review. It really helps us to grow. Make sure you become a member of my Facebook community. I am in there every day with mental health content. And make sure you join my email list. I email every week with the latest podcast episodes, blogs, the latest things I'm up to, the latest offers, freebies. So make sure you get on my newsletter. Those links are in the show notes, and don't forget that every episode of The Wellness Project has an episode page full of all of these links at accordingtodes.com/126. You will also find all of Mallory's links there and detailed show notes. I hope you have a great 2 weeks. I will see you then with another amazing guest. Talk to you soon.